You check your banking app for the third time today. $19,833 landed 2 days ago, your first paycheck since your title changed and your salary crocked $400,000 a year. And you still feel poor. Not broke, poor. There's a version of anxious that has nothing to do with the number and everything to do with a feeling that refuses to catch up to the math. You know the number is good. You know it puts you in a room most people never enter, a room your younger self would not have believed existed, let alone believed you'd end up sitting in. And you also know that last night, standing in the grocery store, you checked the price of oat milk before putting it in the cart, out of pure habit. The same habit you had at your first job making $42,000 a year, back when checking the price of things wasn't optional, it was survival. The habit didn't get the memo about the raise. Neither did the part of your brain that decides what enough actually means. Here's what nobody explains to you before you get here. The math at this income level is not simple, and it is not generous. You cross a bracket at $256,000, and past that line, more than a third of every additional dollar goes straight to the federal government before you've touched it. Add state tax if you live somewhere that has one. Add the fact that your effective rate, the number you actually pay, not the marginal rate people quoted parties, still eats a bigger chunk than you expected, because nobody explained the difference back when you thought making it just meant a bigger number on an offer letter. You run the math once out of curiosity, dividing what actually lands in your account by what your title supposedly pays you, and the gap is uncomfortable enough that you never run it again. Easier not to know exactly how much of $400,000 actually becomes yours. Then there's the invisible tax nobody puts a name on, the cost of simply being at this altitude. The apartment that made sense at $200,000 doesn't make sense anymore, not because you need more space, because everyone around you moved and staying where you were started to feel like admitting something you weren't ready to admit. The car that was fine last year needs replacing, not because it broke down, but because you noticed, standing in the parking garage one morning, that it was the oldest car in the row. Nobody forced any of this on you. You upgraded one thing at a time, each decision small and reasonable on its own, a nicer gym, a better school for the kids, a cleaning service because your schedule finally justified it. And you woke up one day spending in a way that would have terrified the person who signed the offer letter for $400,000. This is lifestyle inflation, and it is not a character flaw. It's what happens when your income moves faster than your identity does. The identity always lags behind the number, always. You are financially a different person than you were 3 years ago. Some quieter part of you is still catching up to that fact, still running on settings calibrated for someone who made half this much. The real damage doesn't happen when you're alone with your banking app. It happens at dinner. You're at a table with 3 other people from your industry, people who make what you make or close to it, and someone mentions a second home like it's nothing, a casual aside dropped between the appetizer and the entree. Something in your chest tightens, not because you're jealous exactly, because your $400,000 salary, the number that felt enormous the day you got the offer, just quietly became the floor instead of the ceiling. You didn't decide that, it happened to you in real time, over a plate of pasta you're not really tasting anymore. You nod along, you laugh at the right moment, and underneath it, you're doing math you didn't want to do tonight. 2 weeks later, it happens again, in reverse. Your younger cousin calls to catch up, and somewhere in the conversation, your income comes up, the way it does in families, half bragging and half apology, and you can hear something shift in her voice. She goes quiet for a second too long. To her, the number you just said out loud is not a floor, it's a fantasy. It's the kind of money that fixes every problem she's currently lying awake with. You get off the phone and sit with the whiplash of it. 2 conversations, 2 weeks apart, and in one, you were the person falling behind, and in the other, you were the person who had it all figured out. Nothing about your actual bank balance changed between those 2 calls. Only the room did.
There's a meeting at work, a few days after the dinner, where a director casually references the firm's numbers, and you realize you're now in the room where those numbers get discussed before anyone else hears them. You should feel like you've arrived. Instead, you spend the whole meeting waiting for someone to notice you don't quite belong at this table. that you got here on a run of good luck and long hours rather than whatever the people around you seem to think qualifies a person for this level. Nobody says anything. Nobody's even looking at you. The discomfort is entirely internal, which somehow makes it worse, because there's no external proof to argue with. You can't point to a comment or a slight. You just sit there, doing math on your own legitimacy while everyone else discusses quarterly targets like it's the most normal thing in the world. This is the part almost nobody talks about honestly. Wealth is not a number. It's a position relative to whoever is closest to you. Move into a new tax bracket, and your reference group moves with you, automatically, without asking your permission. You left behind the friends who still check delivery fees before ordering takeout, and you joined a room where a beach house is a throwaway line at dinner. You are, by any reasonable measure, one of the highest earners in the country. In one room tonight, you're the success story. In another room, same week, same income, you're the person who doesn't have a second home yet. Both of those things are true at the same time, and your nervous system cannot hold both, so it picks the one that hurts and runs with it. You go home and sit with something uncomfortable. You don't actually know what tier you belong to anymore. 6 months ago, you were the story at your parents' dinner table, the kid who made it, the number they bragged to relatives who didn't ask. Last week, you were the one slightly behind at a work dinner. Both rooms think they know exactly where you stand. Neither one is right, because there is no fixed line. There's only whoever happens to be sitting across the table from you at any given moment, silently setting the scale you measure yourself against. This is where the quiet fear starts to build. The one you don't say out loud because saying it feels ungrateful when so many people would trade places with you in a heartbeat. You've built something real. $400,000 a year is not a small thing, and you know that. And you also lie awake some nights doing a different kind of math, the kind about how fast it could disappear. One bad year in your industry, one health event nobody plans for, one market correction that guts the portfolio you've barely started building. You hear about layoffs 2 levels up from you at a company down the street, people who made what you make gone in a single afternoon meeting. And it lodges somewhere in your chest that doesn't fully unclench for days. You're not worried about being poor the way you were poor at 22, eating the same 6 meals on rotation because that's what the budget allowed. You're worried about the specific humiliation of losing altitude once you've had it, of going back to checking prices, not out of habit, but out of necessity, in front of people who watched you climb. You mentioned some of this to a financial advisor you finally hired, half expecting her to tell you you're being dramatic. Instead, she nods like she's heard it 100 times, because she has. She tells you the clients who feel the calmest aren't the ones with the highest incomes. They're the ones who stopped checking their net worth against their neighbor's driveway and started checking it against a number they wrote down for themselves years ago, before all of this started. She says most of her clients making $400,000 feel exactly like you do right now. She says most of her clients making $4 million feel it too, just with better cars in the driveway doing the comparing. You leave that meeting with a spreadsheet, some new numbers, and the uncomfortable sense that the spreadsheet was never going to be the thing that fixed this. Zoom out for a second, because this isn't just your story. This is what happens at every income tier, right at the moment people cross into it. The money doesn't stop the anxiety, it just changes what the anxiety is about. At $40,000 a year, you worry about rent and whether the car will make it through winter. At $400,000, you worry about whether the school district is good enough, whether your portfolio is diversified enough, whether the people around you actually like you or like your zip code. The dollar amount attached to the fear keeps climbing. The fear itself never really goes anywhere. It just changes clothes and shows up at a nicer address. Ask anyone honest enough to tell you the truth about the tier above yours, the ones with the 8-figure exits and the family offices, and they'll tell you some version of the same thing happens up there too. There is no altitude where the feeling stops. There's only a higher altitude where the same feeling has better furniture and a better view while it keeps you up at night. Somewhere, a psychologist has a term for this, something about hedonic adaptation, the idea that people recalibrate to whatever their new baseline is within months, and then start measuring happiness against the next rung up instead of the one they just left. You don't need the academic term to recognize it. You've lived it twice already, once between 40,000 and 150,000, and again between 150,000 and 400,000. Each jump felt for about 6 weeks like the answer. Then, when the 6 weeks ended, the new number became the wallpaper of your life, and the anxiety found a new set of numbers to attach itself to.
So what actually changes this? Not more money. You already have proof that more money alone doesn't do it because you have more than double what you had 3 years ago, and the feeling followed you here anyway, unpacked its bags and made itself at home. What changes is deciding on purpose who you're measuring yourself against, instead of letting proximity make that decision for you by default. That friend group at that dinner table was not a neutral fact of your life. It was a series of choices, even if none of them felt like choices at the time. And you're allowed to make different ones. You can decide that enough gets defined by the life you actually want to live, the one only you can really see clearly, instead of the life visible from whatever table you happen to be sitting at on a given Tuesday night. That's not a financial decision. No amount of income solves it, because it was never a math problem to begin with. It's a decision about where you point your attention, and you're the only person alive who can make it for you. The apartment doesn't need to keep pace with your coworkers' apartments. The car doesn't need to be the newest one in the garage. The dinner table conversation about second homes doesn't need to become the measuring stick for your entire year or your entire sense of whether you're winning. You get to opt out of the comparison, not because you're above it, and not because the number stops mattering, but because you finally understand it's the comparison itself doing the damage, not the number in your account. This doesn't happen in one dramatic realization. It happens the next time someone at a dinner mentions a second home, and instead of feeling your chest tighten, you notice the old reflex arriving, recognize it for what it is, and let it pass through without grabbing the wheel. It happens the next time your cousin calls and you catch yourself about to apologize for the number, and you decide not to. It happens in 100 small moments where you choose your own reference point over whichever one the room hands you by default. None of those moments look like anything from the outside. Nobody would put them in a highlight reel. But they're the actual work, the part that happens quietly long after the paycheck lands. You open the banking app one more time before bed. $19,833. Same as this morning, same as 2 hours ago. Nothing about the number changed while you sat with all of this. What changed is what you're measuring it against. You're not comparing it to a beach house someone mentioned over pasta anymore. You're not comparing it to your cousin's version of a fantasy number either. You're comparing it to the 22-year-old who used to check the price of everything out of real necessity, the one who would have looked at this exact bank balance and felt something closer to disbelief than dread. $400,000 a year was never going to feel like enough, as long as enough was defined by whoever happened to be sitting across from you. It was only ever going to feel like enough once you decided that for yourself, on your own terms, in a room with no one else in it, measuring nothing against anyone. You close the app. For the first time in longer than you can remember, the number just sits there, quiet, not asking anything of you. Not a floor, not a ceiling, not a verdict on who you are. Just a number, finally allowed to be exactly that.